Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Book Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, we've had a weekend of some very interesting and active diplomacy. We had a meeting of the coalition of the irrelevant, to quote our friend Mark Sloboda. So we had. We don't have Olaf Scholz to kick around anymore. We have the new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz.
We're ready. We're ready. We're ready.
Yeah, I think we'll find some phrase for him. And French President Emmanuel Macron, and of course, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and then Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, traipsing off to Kiev to express their solidarity with Zelensky. But of course, ultimately, the one objective, the one thing that they need to ensure is that there is no possibility, none whatsoever, of any kind of a peaceful resolution in Ukraine. That's the only thing
we can call them the warnicks.
Exactly. So
Not
they went
there. To everyone, the warnicks.
That's right. They went there, and of course, what they said is that there must be immediately, starting Monday, this coming Monday, a 30-day ceasefire. 30-day
We will it. We will it.
We will it. Exactly. This after Russia had already said that they're not going to accept a 30-day ceasefire unless certain conditions are met, the most important of which is that you cease arming Ukraine. We're not going to have 30 days. Essentially, you're going to give them a nice pause in the fighting while you bring in everything that you have in your armories into Ukraine and provide training and whatever. I mean, it's nuts. I mean, for us to agree to this. So the Russians have said this, and nonetheless, this coalition of the irrelevant are absolutely pushing for this 30-day ceasefire. And then, and we can come to that, they claim that Trump is on board for this, which is not true. That is simply is untrue, that Trump is not on board with this. But in any case, later on that same day, then President Putin spoke to the media. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning, Russian time. Yep. And he spoke and put forward an alternative, which was that he's ready to open direct negotiations with Ukraine,
without preconditions,
starting this Thursday in Istanbul, because of course that was where the previous negotiations took place in 2022 that were aborted by Ukraine and its Western supporters. So Russia's saying that we're ready. We were ready then. You walked away. We didn't walk away. You walked away from these direct negotiations. And what I think was important in what Putin said is he said, we're ready to open direct negotiations, which is what the Americans have been asking for. This was J.D. Vance said this. He wants to see direct negotiation. And Trump said this when he was asked, what's your message to Putin? And the journalist asked, he said, my message to both of them is that they have to sort this out. They have to settle this. So he's saying, well, look, we got direct negotiation. So here, let me just show you what Putin said. Here we have is a statement to the media, and he says Russia has repeatedly put forward initiatives to cease fire, but these initiatives have been sabotaged time and again by the Ukrainian side. Thus, the Kiev regime has demonstratively violated the 30-day moratorium on attacks on energy facilities, which was declared in accordance with our agreement with the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. They violated by 130 times. And then the Easter truce, they violated it 5,000 times. And then we had it says, let me once again repeat, we have repeatedly proposed steps to cease fire. We have never refused to engage in dialogue with the Ukrainian side. Let me remind you once again, it was not we who interrupted the negotiations in 2022. It was the Ukrainian side. In this regard, despite everything, we proposed that the Kiev authorities resume the negotiations they interrupted at the end of 2022. Moreover, I emphasize without any preconditions. And then he proposes May the 15th.
Everyone, if I could just interject here, everyone can think it's really important, is that what the Russians are proposing is going back to the same venue as in 2022, as George has pointed out, without preconditions, but with the caveat that the fighting will continue. There's not going to be any interruption of the fighting.
Right.
It will continue as planned, if it happens, on the 15th of May. See, this is the Europeans, they want a cessation and then start talks. The Russians say, no, we can have talks, but we're going to, the military conflict will continue. These are the two different
right, but that's very important. First of all, there's no necessity for there to be a ceasefire for talks to take place. You know, in Vietnam, the Paris peace negotiations, they started about 1968, went on through to 1973. There's 5 years, the Paris peace talks continued, so there was no ceasefire during those 5 years. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, there was a ceasefire for 3 months. During, of course, what did the Western powers do during the ceasefire? They used it in order to strengthen their clients in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Croatia. So absolutely, you know, you don't want to give people a ceasefire if they're just going to exploit it to, to strengthen their own side. There's no need for this. But they want to do it. They want to make this into a, oh, well, they're not really interested we need a ceasefire.
Yeah, and Keith Kellogg making beclowning himself as he does expertly went on Fox News saying, and a 30-day ceasefire, he's not talking about negotiations.
Right.
He said after the 30 days, it could be extended. I mean, why he thinks that, I don't know why.
Right.
Unfortunately, when he's flipping his gums, no one checks him or pushes back.
But it's very hard to know exactly what his standing is. You know, he was supposed to be the point man on this war, but he's not the point man on this war.
Oh, no, he's Ukraine's foreign minister.
He's Ukraine's foreign minister. That's right. And it says, as is known, Turkish colleagues have repeatedly offered their services to organize such negotiations, and President Erdogan has done a lot to organize them. And then it says, let me remind you, there was a joint draft document was prepared and initialed by the head of the Kiev negotiating group, but at the insistence of the West, it was simply thrown into the trash. Then he says, we are committed to serious negotiations with Ukraine. Their purpose is to eliminate the root causes of the conflict, to establish a long-term lasting peace. For the historical perspective, we do not rule out that during these negotiations, it will be possible to agree on some new truces, a new ceasefire. So that's important. We do not rule out that during these negotiations, in other words, if they're making progress, if there's seems to be genuine desire to make progress and to resolve these issues rather than just simply play for time, then it might be we could have a ceasefire. But you have to ascertain whether this is serious. Just simply saying 30-day ceasefire, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And then, moreover, a real truce, which would be observed not only by Russia, but also by the Ukrainian side, would be the first step, I repeat, to a long-term sustainable peace, and not a prologue to the continuation of the armed conflict after the rearmament, the replenishment of the Ukrainian armed forces, and the feverish digging of trenches and new strongholds. Who needs such a peace? Well, I know who. Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, and Donald Tusk. That's the plan. That's exactly how they make no secret of it.
It's so interesting. and the Americans back it. There is no evidence of that at all. At least public evidence coming from the administration. Okay.
Exactly,
Or,
exactly.
or maybe, George and I and so many other people like us who have been totally hoodwinked.
Right.
It's Keith Kellogg. He's actually the master
Right,
behind
well,
all of
no,
these
no, that's
moves.
right. Because
Okay.
it's on the contrary. We had J.D. Vance. He was in Munich a few days ago, and he said we have abandoned our obsession with this 30-day ceasefire. He said our obsession. He used that word obsession. That's a very negative thing. In other words, J.D. Vance realizes this is a little game that the Europeans are playing. They're trying to inveigle us into this conflict by making it the fetish of the 30-day ceasefire,
You
which is a
use the word.
non-starter.
You used the word. I was about to say it. Fetish. That's
That's right,
exactly.
exactly. That's it. So you're not really interested in just this the ceasefire. And said, well, we're not obsessed with it. Basically, we're thinking in terms of a long-term solution. We're trying to find the framework for a long-term solution. Um, And then here, our proposal is, as I say, on the table. The decision is now up to the Ukrainian authorities and their curators, who apparently, guided by their personal political ambitions and not by the interests of their people, want to continue the war with Russia through the hands of Ukrainian nationalists. I repeat, Russia is ready for negotiations without preconditions. There are military actions, a war, and we propose to resume negotiations that were interrupted not by us. What's wrong with that?
George, one of the things that's very interesting to observe is from the advent of the start of the special military operation, we've seen in the West so many different narratives come out. Russia is losing, Russia has lost, Russia is using transistors from washing machines. They've run out of shells. They're begging the North Koreans for ammunition. The Iranians are fulfilling their drone needs. The economy is teetering. The ruble is rubble. Putin is about to leave the presidential palace. We could go on and on and on. But when you're reading this to all of us, what is amply clear is that Russia's narrative, if we want to use that word, hasn't changed really one iota at all.
Right. No, that's right. I think that the conditions are the same, and the deal, and this has to be repeated, and Putin doesn't say it, of course, but we can say it. The deal was very advantageous for Ukraine. It was a really, really good deal. I mean,
In my opinion, Istanbul would have been a strategic defeat for Russia.
I think so. I think so too. I think Ukraine would have been in a better position than they were before the start of the so-called SMO. So it was a really amazing deal for them to throw away. Um, and then those who truly want peace cannot but support this. At the same time, I would like to once again express my gratitude for the mediation services, the efforts aimed at a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian crisis, which are being undertaken by our foreign partners. And these are China, Brazil, countries of Africa and the Middle East, and recently the new administration of the United States of America. It's very important. He puts the Americans in this list, the Americans under Trump, in this list of those countries that have been helpful. So
it's important. This is extremely important. Even though he put the United States last, it's the country he's looking at most.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly. And why, everyone? Because we are approaching the Rubicon. We really are. Because what has changed? What has changed since Trump came into office? Has a peace plan, a viable peace plan, been developed for Ukraine? No. Does it look like organized chaos? More or less. George and I have talked about it enough. Who do we listen to? Witkoff, Kellogg, Truth Social. Okay, that's a mess. But what is not a mess is improving the bilateral relationship. And this mentioning the new administration of the United States of America, the Kremlin is saying, we have made progress. And you know what? It's at stake.
It's to say we've made progress, but I think also that they look at the administration. Trump wants to end this now. I think he wants to end this. He sees that there's nothing good that can come out of this war. There's no question. I mean,
Nothing good for him.
well, all right, whatever. I mean,
No. But I think.
I mean, I think that he has been consistent since 2022 that he doesn't want this war. I mean, he's been against this war really from the start. Um, but look, he's in a difficult position, and I think one has to appreciate that he's got a Washington culture throughout. Capitol Hill. Almost everyone on Capitol Hill wants this war to continue, and the United States to get even more heavily involved. You've got the whole military industrial media complex, all of whom want to be involved. And then you have the Europeans who, without question, are playing a very sinister game. I think they're almost certainly colluding with the Democrats and plotting against Trump, figuring that, well, he's not going to be here forever. We can just simply delay things, but they're clearly colluding there. So it's not an easy situation for him to be in. But he has abandoned the goals that the Biden administration and the Europeans and NATO, all the stuff about Ukraine within the 1991 borders. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine and
NATO membership.
Let's get the Russians out of the country. NATO membership. All that has been thrown out of the window by Trump.
The Kremlin is making this is a public relations pitch to remind the administration what is at stake. Right. Because there are reports, and you take everything with a grain of salt. Putin is not even interested. If Macron were to call, Putin's not going to pick up the phone.
Right.
And this is their trajectory. The Russian trajectory is if this is going to be resolved, and we don't know if it's going to be resolved, it's going to be through Washington.
Absolutely. No, because the Europeans and the Democrats, and as I say, I think they're colluding. They're determined to keep this war going. Absolutely, whatever they can do in order to keep this going. And they figure, hey, the clock is ticking. They know he's already 3.5 years to go before he's gone. So if you're absolutely right, if it will be resolved, if it does get resolved, it will be through the Americans. Anyway, Trump, then after this, Trump sent out this truth, and it says, a potentially great day for Russia and Ukraine. Think of the hundreds of thousands of lives that would be saved as this never-ending bloodbath hopefully comes to an end. It will be a whole new and much better world. I will continue to work with both sides to make sure that it happens. The USA wants to focus instead on rebuilding and trade, a big week upcoming. So this is usual kind of Trumpian, hyperbole, let's say. Nonetheless, you can see he's positive. He's a positive.
Yeah. But I mean, again, he's making it clear because his administration has not been very adept at dealing with this issue. And Putin wants to talk to the Ukrainians. Help them, let them go.
That's right.
Let them go. Let them do it. Trump would much better. And then he'll say, well, it's because of my presidency that they talk together. Okay, right, whatever he wants. I don't care.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And that's
basically saying, yeah, take care of it. It's not my war. I wasn't here. I didn't want this. Okay.
That's right. Exactly.
Remember, George, wouldn't it be good to have better relations with Russia? Remember that?
He said that 2015, 2016, and boom, he was thrown off his stride, deliberately so. Again, the Europeans were heavily involved in that. The Democrats thrown off his stride with the whole Russiagate nonsense, and that put pay to that during his first term. Exactly the same thing is being done now. I mean, this is what they're trying to do now, to throw him off his stride and get Trump to support this mischief that the Europeans are causing. That's what the plan is. That's what they're trying to get. That's why they keep saying, "Oh, Trump's with us. Oh, he's with us. He's supporting us."
He's not. That just shows how incompetent these people are. They continue to live in an imaginary world, a place with imaginary facts, okay?
Right.
I don't know if you saw the picture of them in Kiev sitting on the couch. It looked pretty pathetic to me,
Yes. Yes.
okay?
Yes.
Okay. And then I don't know who does Macron's PR. The person should be fired. He makes Macron looks silly. He
Yes.
looks like a silly little man.
He does. He does. And when you see those pictures of him kissing Zelensky, or biting his ear, it's not a good look. Let's say, you kind of, what, this is a French president. What's he doing here? Kissing and hugging Zelensky. But this is so
And
this.
and 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 also, again, maybe because George and I are just history nerds, but it really says a lot about the lack of standing of these individual countries. I mean, you have to get all together to get some kind of critical mass, and
Right.
you can't even do that.
Right. Right.
I mean, in my lifetime, these
Correct.
were considered, important countries.
Right.
Okay.
No. No.
And then you put them in on a couch with a guy dressed in khakis, and we're supposed to think this is like, on the eve of the
Yes.
Battle of Britain?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. No. No. That's right. Yeah. Um. And then some. But Macron, he sent out this. He said, in Kiev and alongside President Trump, right away, see, and alongside President Trump, he wasn't there. We made a clear proposal, an unconditional 30-day ceasefire starting on Monday.
I'm sorry. Alongside President Trump.
Where
Everybody,
was he?
Trump wasn't there.
He wasn't there. He wasn't there. He didn't put his name to any statement of yours. He was not there. And I'm sure if he were willing to agree, you could have put him on speed dial and we could have heard him speak. He wasn't even on speed dial.
Even if he had done that, Trump was probably playing golf and he'd say, "Who?" George, you know what compounds this idiocy here? You don't make an unconditional demand
No,
unless there is a possibility,
right,
even
exactly.
remote,
Yeah.
that it could happen. If you don't have that,
Right,
don't do it.
right, right.
It's
No, no,
silly.
it's exactly. But of course, the reason they do it is they know it will be turned down. I mean, are you're making a demand unconditional? Who are you to make an unconditional demand on anyone? Unconditional 30-day ceasefire starting on Monday. President Zelensky committed without setting any condition. We now expect an equally clear response from Russia. Why? They've already told you. I mean, this issue has already come up, and Russia made clear its position. So an equally clear response from Russia.
We now expect an equally clear response from Russia. So, Macron, what is your role in all of this? I thought you weren't a co-belligerent.
That's right. Yes.
Okay. I mean, why should anyone listen to the French president when it comes to a proxy war that
Right.
the French president and his allies have thrust upon Russia? Where is your standing? There's
That's
no
right.
standing.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. There can be no negotiations while weapons are speaking. Why not? Like, why? I don't understand. It's a kind of a
I
non
mean,
sequitur.
what's the PR person? Is it weapons speaking? Are you supposed to be? Is this poetic?
I think so. Weapons are
Don't guns
speak.
or don't they scream or
I guess
howl?
they, but sometimes if you put a silencer on it, then maybe it's a whisper.
There can be no negotiations while weapons
Uh,
are on silencer. Okay, I don't know.
yeah, there can be no dialogue if at the same time civilians are being bombed. Why not? That's probably the time that you want your dialogue. A ceasefire is needed now so that talks can begin for peace. So not, he's right away he's ruling out the direct negotiations, something Trump clearly hasn't done. But right away, no, absolutely not. No, 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 no negotiations, nothing. Right? So you're ruling it out. Why would you rule out the direct negotiations? Why not come to Istanbul, see what happens? Oh, there can be no negotiations. There'll be no. It's kind of, apart from anything else, it's a very irresponsible position to take. No negotiations? You mean no negotiation with the possibility that the war and the killing could stop, and you're ruling out any negotiations?
When your troops are not dying, someone
Right.
else's are.
Someone else's are, exactly. So that's Macron. And then Zelensky. It's a positive sign that the Russians have finally begun to consider ending the war. Who walked away from the negotiations? The entire world has been waiting for this for a very long time. And the very first step in truly ending any war is a ceasefire. So they're all, you see that this is always happens. They're all on the same wavelength. There's no point in continuing the killing even for a single day. We expect Russia to confirm a ceasefire, full, lasting, and reliable, starting tomorrow, May the 12th, and Ukraine is ready to meet. And then
No, they're not. No, Ukraine is ready to meet what?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what is that.
What does he meet? He's ready there to meet NATO and meet
I don't. That's a very good question. I'm a little puzzled. I mean, is ready to meet. If you mean if there's a ceasefire, then they're willing to show up in Istanbul. That isn't clear at all from that. And Ukraine is ready to meet. But this was really interesting. I wanted to point out because this is again shows how the fake news. Trump sent out this. This is, I guess, just before the trek to Kiev. He sent this out. Talks with Russia, Ukraine continue. The U.S. calls for ideally, a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Well, ideally doesn't mean anything. Well, ideally, yeah, ideally, we'd like this war to come to an end. Ideally, it would be great if there were no more wars in the world. Ideally, it would be great if everyone had enough food to eat. So
ideally, I would get a hole in one every time I swing my
exactly
golf club.
my golf club. Yeah, the U.S. calls for ideally a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, which is clearly not what the Europeans called for. Hopefully, an acceptable ceasefire will be observed, and both countries will be held accountable for respecting the sanctity of these direct negotiations. Again, direct negotiations. If the ceasefire is not respected, the US and its partners will impose further sanctions. So notice, you have to have the ceasefire in place, and then whoever is not respecting the ceasefire will be sanctioned. Ursula von der Leyen said, oh, yeah, when Russia violates the ceasefire, we will impose further sanctions on Russia. But not if Ukraine. I mean, it's like only Russia can possibly violate any ceasefire, and then we can say. So his point was sanctions after the ceasefire, which ideally would be in place, but who knows whether it will be in place. And then thousands of young soldiers are dying on a weekly basis, and everybody should want it to stop. I do, and the United States of America does also. As president, I will stay committed to securing peace between Russia and Ukraine, together with the Europeans, and a lasting peace it will be. A ceasefire must ultimately build towards a peace agreement. It can all be done very quickly, and I will be available on a moment's notice if my services are needed. And then he puts in these strange things that he does in these truths. He says, thank you for your attention to this matter. It's a kind of lawyerly thing that, when a lawyer sends you a very nasty, threatening letter, he puts it at the end, thank you for your attention to this matter.
Yeah, but in a way, too, I will be available on a moment's notice. But you can also read that as he's washing his hands.
Right. Could be. That's right. That's right. But what's interesting, he says here, this is ideally 30 days, and then says, hopefully an acceptable ceasefire will be observed. Both countries will be held accountable for respecting the sanctity of the direct negotiation. If the ceasefire is not respected, if after ceasefire is in place is not respected, the U.S. and its partners will impose further sanctions. Here's the New York Times' take. Trump says U.S. will impose more sanctions on Russia if it does not extend to an extended truce. Where did it say anything like that? This is the New York Times headline. Trump says U.S. will impose more sanctions on Russia if it does not agree to an extended truce. So this is what I mean, that the media are deliberately trying to create this, essentially, get the Americans on board with this European plan, and they're kind of creating like facts on the ground as if Trump has already agreed to what the Europeans are doing. President Trump made his threat in a post on Truth Social that came after a phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine. As we'll see from that phone call with Ukraine, again, Trump said nothing of the sort to Zelensky. So it says, President Trump said the United States would impose sanctions on Russia if it did not accept an extended ceasefire in its war. I mean, it's complete distortion, complete lie as to what Trump had actually said in his war with Ukraine, writing on social media after a phone call with Zelensky. The remark was another swivel by the administration closer to Ukraine's position in ceasefire talks after 2 months of concessions to Russia, including broadening diplomatic relations and voting against the UN resolution condemning Moscow for the war. And then after a meeting in Vatican City with Mr. Zelensky on the sidelines of Pope Francis' funeral last month, Mr. Trump threatened Russia with sanctions if it drew out of the negotiations. Again, not true.
What negotiations are there?
What exactly?
Exactly. What are the
exactly? What negotiations? That's right. Just this is the Times. New York Times always just makes up what negotiations. But his social media post after his call with Mr. Zelensky was his clearest statement yet that he was linking additional U.S. sanctions on Russia to its acceptance of a 30-day truce for negotiations. Totally made up, complete fiction. And then here's what Zelensky sent out after his conversation with Trump. I had a good conversations with POTUS. We congratulated our nations on victory in Europe Day, the victory over Nazism. We welcomed the Ukrainian parliament's ratification of the Economic Partnership Agreement, truly historic document that opens up many new opportunities of cooperation. And then we discussed the need for continued efforts to achieve peace, including concrete steps that could be taken. President Trump inquired about the situation on the battlefield, and I provided a brief overview. I also informed him that that Ukraine is ready for a 30-day ceasefire, starting even today. We are waiting for Russia to support this proposal. I also reaffirmed that Ukraine is ready to engage in talks in any format, but for that, Russia must demonstrate the seriousness of intentions to end the war, starting with a full unconditional ceasefire. Where does it say that Trump agreed with any of this? This is what I said to Trump. Okay. Conversation ends. Okay. There's nothing here that Trump agreed with any of this with Zelensky and said, oh, well, if that's the case, I'm going to impose sanctions on Russia. And then President Trump confirmed that he wants this war to end, is ready to help, and supports the need for a ceasefire. We agreed on our further.
Well, why? It's really interesting for the Times. I say this with irony, is that they have access to his truth. Why don't they?
That's right.
Use it as a source.
Exactly.
Why do you need to paraphrase him?
That's right. And that's the thing. What they're trying to do is precisely to create this fiction that somehow Trump has really had it with Putin. He's that's it. He's basically, he feels that he's been taken in by Putin, and he's now on board. He's now absolutely firmly on board with NATO. He wants to impose sanctions on Russia. He's wholly wants to arm Ukraine and continue with this wonderful, glorious Biden NATO policy of waging this war. And here's this is from the Keir Starmer. European leaders set to travel to Kiev as the US, France, Germany, Poland, and the UK call for a 30-day ceasefire. And here's the joint statement. Blah, blah. We reiterate our backing for President Trump's call for a peace deal. They bring in, it's like the second sentence, they will bring in President Trump. Yeah, he's with us. Call for a peace deal and call on Russia to stop obstructing efforts to secure an enduring peace. What enduring peace? You keep talking about this unconditional 30-day ceasefire. Where's the enduring peace?
They're just talking to themselves.
That's right. Alongside the U.S., we call on Russia to agree to a full and unconditional 30-day ceasefire to create the space for talks on a just and lasting peace. Well, then we go back to the same thing. Well, if you've got the talks on the just and lasting peace, why can't you just start the talks? Hey, you don't have to have a ceasefire. You just start the talks on just and lasting peace.
Erdogan is polishing up the silverware. Come on down.
Right.
Come on down.
That's it. We are ready to support peace talks as soon as possible. In other words, the very opposite the case, to discuss technical implementation of the ceasefire and prepare for a full peace deal. Again, so they keep talking.
But I mean, George, I mean, it ends. This is going into the realm of a farce. They know that the Russians won't agree to this, but they
know this
over and over again, over and over again. It's a non-starter. Why are you wasting our time?
Exactly. And particularly when they talk about the technical implementation, and you mean we're going to send our forces into Ukraine, and the Russians are going to say no. I mean, this is absolutely unconditionally, categorically, they're not going to accept NATO forces inside Ukraine. And yet they talk about the technical implementation of the ceasefire.
They're so ahead of themselves, aren't they?
Yes. And then we are clear the bloodshed must end. Russia must stop its illegal invasion, and Ukraine must be able to prosper as a safe, secure, and sovereign nation within its internationally recognized borders.
Oh, here we go again.
Here we go, internationally recognized borders. That's the point. And you say Trump has already clearly said that's not our objective. We're not going to go for that internationally recognized borders. That's gone. And yet they say, oh, alongside the United States, we support the Trump plan. He said international recognized border, that's gone. They've already said, Pete Hegseth has said this, J.D. Vance has said this, and Trump has said this.
So the European leaders, they're not aware of what's happened over the last 3 years, George.
No, they're not. They're not. We will continue to increase our support for Ukraine. Okay, great. Until Russia agrees to an enduring ceasefire, we will ratchet up pressure on Russia's war machine.
Okay, these guys are like toy soldiers.
That's it. And then Starmer held a news conference, and he continued. Now, it's almost 2 months now since you agreed to an immediate 30-day ceasefire. And then it goes on. That Russia offers in peace along with delays and smoke screens like the current 72-hour ceasefire. All of us are here together with the U.S.
Again.
Yeah, where are they? Where? Not only is there no Trump, there's no one from the administration there. At least we've got J.D. Vance here or something.
On Old Arbat, it's a tourist trap in the center of Moscow. There's a souvenir store where they have a life-size cutout of Xi and Trump. And Trump. And so they're stand, and you can stand in the middle, and you can put your arms around them, and it's a family photo. But they're just cutouts. Right. That's what they're doing. Summer's pulling out a cutout, putting it right there. I'm with the president right now. That's exactly what he's doing.
That's it. Exactly. That's right here. That's right. If he's serious about peace, then he has a chance to show it now by extending the V-Day pause into a full, unconditional 30-day ceasefire with negotiations to follow immediately once the ceasefire is agreed.
Why can't they start immediate negotiations?
Right. Exactly. And then once Putin made this offer, Macron, as we saw, he immediately
not enough.
No, exactly. No more ifs and buts. No more conditions and delays. Putin didn't need conditions when he wanted to have a ceasefire, to have a parade, and he doesn't need them now.
No. What it was, yes, the condition was that we will stop fighting if the Ukrainians stop fighting. Okay, it's as clear as day, and there was a reason for it. Okay, there was a celebration to be made
Right.
over countries that were allied with Nazi Germany that tried to destroy the Soviet Union. That was good
Right.
enough reason for me, at least.
That's right. That's right. But it says conditions. Well, the condition that you're not going to use that 30 days to pour weaponry into Ukraine, that's quite a big condition. I mean that the idea that somehow, oh well, you can't impose conditions. Yeah, you absolutely can impose conditions, because that would be a serious issue, that you would use this 30 days to rearm, replenish Ukraine in order to restart the whole thing after 30 days. And so, oh no conditions, no conditions.
With NATO troops on the ground.
That's right. And then, so we are clear, all 5 leaders here, all the leaders of the meeting we just had with the coalition, the willing an unconditional ceasefire, rejecting Putin's conditions, and clear that if he turns his back on peace, we will respond.
Oh my God! What are they going to do, George?
Working with President Trump.
What are they going to do, George? That they haven't, what they already haven't done.
Exactly, they haven't already done.
What they haven't already done. This is such a ridiculous bluff, and it would just be completely farcical, except for the fact that people keep dying.
Yeah, that's right.
They're so indifferent.
That's right, and that's their objective. And hence they continually have to bring up working with President Trump. Oh, President Trump. As I was saying to President Trump the other day, working with President Trump, with all our partners, we will ramp up sanctions and increase our military aid for Ukraine's defense to pressure Russia back to the table.
What other sanctions can they do?
Exactly. I like this sort of Russia back to the table. Who walked away from the table? This is a lie. Who walked away from the table? It wasn't Russia. Russia didn't walk away from the table. Ukraine walked away from the table. And it was your predecessor, Boris Johnson, who made sure that he walked away from the table. So we're going to put pressure on Russia, and then working with President Trump. Trump has not agreed to any of this. This is the Bundeskanzler Friedrich Merz. Merz, when you look at him in these pictures, he's one of these characters he's very tall. And I think that's really the key to his, I guess, some success that he's enjoyed in life, because he doesn't seem to have anything going for him. And, other than he seems to, he does seem a lot taller than everybody else in these group photos.
He can see farther, George.
Exactly. That's the thing. I think he can see farther. Yeah.
Unlike Madeleine Albright, she was about
we see further than anybody else.
Yeah, but she was like
4'6".
4.6. Yeah.
We call on Russia to implement a 30-day unconditional ceasefire as of Monday, together with President Trump. We will do everything.
They have this Trump fetish. Okay?
Exactly. We will do everything in our power to support Ukraine, including by extending sanctions.
Yeah, how sanctions done for you, Fred?
Exactly. How many rounds have they had? 17, was it? I mean,
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll be 17, 18. Lucky number coming up.
That's right. And then he continues. He sent out this whole Twitter flurry. He says, we spoke with President Trump on the phone after our meeting in Kiev. I spoke to him, but we couldn't hear what he was saying. He supports our initiative. Oh, yes, he supports us. It's funny that he didn't say that in any of his truths. We are working together with the United States to ensure that Russia finally agrees to a longer ceasefire without imposing any preconditions. So they keep repeating this. Oh, that's the thing. They have to repeat this. Yeah, we spoke to Trump. He supports us. He's on board.
But don't you like this? Finally agrees to a longer ceasefire, as if a ceasefire it's already been. Now we're talking about the length of the ceasefire.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Without imposing any preconditions. Well, I mean, but it's
So there
interesting.
is a precondition that you give up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's right. And then again, and then he goes and continues, this Bundeskanzler. It's clear to us the bloodshed must end. Russia must end its illegal war of aggression, and Ukraine must be enabled to develop as a sovereign nation within its internationally recognized borders, including for future generations. So, in other words, Russia must capitulate. Well, that's
so what happened? Some guy, some PR guy came in and wrote it, and all those European leaders just sent it out verbatim,
yes,
essentially.
that's right. Exactly. It is like that. Remember when there was that first 30-day ceasefire with Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, and everybody said the same thing. The ball is now in Putin's court. The ball is now in Putin's court. It obviously somebody's just sort of sends this out, and then everybody just puts their own top and tail
Well,
on it.
it's interesting with the whole signal gate brouhaha. Pete Hegseth actually showed all of us how it works. It's Biden's fault
Yep.
with securing international, whatever it was. I mean,
Right.
he just keep repeating those two things,
That's
okay?
right. Yes.
And that's how it works, everyone.
It is. It
And
does.
what kind of standing, what kind of self-respect do these people have when some underling says, "Now retweet this." Okay. Wow.
That's right. Um, and
Bundeskanzler.
yes, Bundeskanzler.
We got to work on a name for him.
Yes, yeah, that we do. Yes.
All right,
Uh,
we're on the
yeah,
case.
we're on the case. Yeah. Something like Mertz, misery or something like that.
There you go. George
Something along those lines.
George missed his calling. He's a poet at heart. He's a poet.
I mean, he kind of looks rather miserable. Um, and then so yeah,
Gauleiter of misery.
that's right, exactly.
That's a
So
good one.
yeah,
It's a
that's right.
little long. It doesn't roll off the tongue, but Gauleiter of misery.
That's right.
We can, we can work with this. Okay.
Yes. So this is well, now we can already see the next steps, which is they're obviously going to tell.
Well, George, we're doing a live stream tomorrow. Oh my God, George? I can't wait to see what's going to happen. Tomorrow is the deadline. Oh.
Oh no, it's a deadline.
Okay, I'm going to go out. I'm going to buy 5 months of food for the dogs, just in case.
That's right. Exactly. So yeah, the deadline, which is that well, clearly Putin hasn't accepted this unconditional ultimatum.
This very generous off ramp.
That's right. That's right. Yes, I love the sort of the ultimatum. That they're issuing these ultimatums.
Oh, it's where it comes from. Neville Chamberlain. Remember on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have sent a note to Berlin.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, the ultimatum to withdraw from Poland.
That's right. But yeah, so
it's really interesting how there's such lazy minds.
Right.
I mean, where's the creativity here? Okay, the last European leader that had any creativity was Charles de Gaulle. Full stop, in my opinion.
Right. That's right. So, but since Zelensky has obviously been told, don't show up for these direct negotiations. I mean, that was the thing. Now, the question is, Trump sent out that tweet or trumped out that truth, where he seemed to be quite enthusiastic. He said, "Hey, well, yeah, we're moving in the right direction," and I think that was clearly the purpose of this Putin's statement at 2 o'clock this morning, which is, sow further divisions between the United States and Europe. United States has said we want to see direct negotiations. That's it. Hey,
well, you know what's going to happen?
Direct negotiations. Here, I'm offering direct negotiations.
I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, everyone. Erdogan has already said he'll step up. Okay. Right. He loves this kind of, oh man, this is made for Erdogan. He loves the theater. He loves being relevant. Likes having a foot in both worlds. This is the stuff that he loves.
Right.
And a palace will be found, a table will be found. There'll be a Russian flag. There'll be a Ukrainian flag. There'll be a Russian official. Who knows who it will be? And no one from the Ukrainian side.
Right.
And that will be a picture.
Right.
Okay?
But that's the thing. That, let's say, okay, he doesn't show up, and the Europeans say, well, that's it. We're putting on further.
What are you going to do?
Let's say we're putting further sanctions. But the Americans are not going to support that. The Americans are not going to go and support what the Europeans are doing because the Americans are not opposed to direct negotiations. So the Europeans, for all the talk, oh, President Trump, President Trump, President Trump, they're out on a limb. They're not. They don't have the support of President Trump.
I don't know if you can do it, George. I don't know how adept you are at doing this. Go into YouTube and find the Monty Python, the two knights fighting. Okay. This is what it is all about. Okay. Come back, you coward. Okay.
Come back.
I mean, who would have thought that Monty Python would be some of the most prescient political thinkers of the 20th century? Okay. Because it's all there. No, George, this is, again, I periodically bring up because I think it's important, is that this is the new narrative.
Right.
The new narrative.
Yep.
Okay. Nothing has happened for 3 years. Istanbul, it didn't happen. That's a fever dream the Russians have poisoned the public discourse.
No.
It never really happened. Boris Johnson never went there. Okay. There was nobody initialed anything. This is what they want to keep telling. The New York Times, again, how much lower can these people go?
No.
I mean, it was such a deceptive reporting on what's going on.
That's right. That's right. I mean, but what changed, for the Europeans, essentially, they were hoping that the whole Biden policy would just continue. Everything would just continue as before, with that Harris would continue and so on. So now they've had to scramble during the past 4 months, essentially to try to pretend that they're actually on board for peace. They're actually in favor of negotiations. So this is the whole thing. All that time, during those 3 years, they had no interest at all in any negotiation. The only thing they had interest in is we have a new arms package. Let's send a new arms package to Ukraine, or let's have another further round of sanctions on Russia. That's all they talked about. And then they would issue these statements, sovereignty, territorial integrity, return to the 1991 borders.
Just peace.
That's peace. Right. We got to, we have to arm Ukraine in order to force Putin to the negotiating table. So now they've abandoned that, and because they have Trump in the White House, so they have to kind of figure out a new way of speaking and pretend that they're interested in negotiations. For 3 years, they had no interest in negotiations. Well, no, now they're pretending that they have some interest.
What they're trying to tell us, and this is remarkable. They're trying to tell us that they know Trump's mind better than Trump does.
That's right. That's right.
That's it. We know what he really wants, and we just have to nudge him there.
That's right. Exactly.
And if necessary, we'll have a life-size cutout sitting next to us.
That's right.
I'm surprised they didn't have a cutout of him on the couch.
That's right. And they also know that the media will play along with this. Just as we saw in that New York Times, they want to play along with it by saying, yeah, Trump and the Europeans, they've issued this ultimatum to Putin that if he doesn't agree to a 30-day ceasefire, Trump, will impose sanctions on Russia. Said nothing of the sort, but they know the media can be relied upon to essentially create facts on the ground by essentially this is now the story. The Americans have agreed to impose sanctions on Russia. So
we'll get tomorrow's a big day, apparently.
It's a big day.
Okay. So is the European ultimatum? What can they possibly say and do that has not been said and done already? Okay.
Yeah, I don't. I'm always surprised that there's things still left to be sanctioned. I didn't realize.
Oh, I think the toothpicks haven't been sanctioned. I'll have to check. Okay. Everyone, just kind of an update here. The sanctions have had no meaningful impact. It's created a lot of irritation.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, it's annoying. But for example, Apple Pay. That's a really convenient operation. I really liked it. Now they have their own. Do people want Apple Pay to come back? They don't need it.
Right.
Why? We have our own.
Right.
Okay. And the number of companies, and there are people checking this, kind of slyly coming back. The Starbucks, it's been reported credibly They want to come back. So they sold their franchise here at bargain basement prices. I mean, they took a bath, okay? Now they're coming back. And it's been made pretty clear, well, there'll be a re-entry into the market tax for you to come back. And the current owners, well, they might sell it at multiples of 3 or 4 or 5% of what they bought it for. That's if they come back. I mean, and this is going to be repeated all across the board. You left, now you're going to have to pay a tax to get back in. And well, the owners, it's up to them. I mean, this is and it was so predictable, all of this. Okay. It go all across the board. There are companies, well, we want to come back. How can we do this? They're in negotiations, but Putin has made it very clear. Well, you can come back, but not at expense of Russian companies that have filled the gap while you left.
Right.
That's a form of a smart tariff. Okay, that's a form of a tariff. Okay?
Yeah. No, that's right. So let's say, I guess sometime tomorrow, they'll make the announcement of new round of sanctions. There's no, no.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine like Stelmer and Macron? They're in their office, and the phone is next to them. They're just like, "Who's going to get a call?" And then he calls Macron. Did you get a call? Anybody call you? No. All right. Okay, contact me on WhatsApp. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're sitting there, like, okay, well, maybe Mertz heard something. Okay. Now get Tusk come online. Did he get a call? Okay. This is the farce.
But it's such a bizarre thing. I mean, it's obviously directed at trying to rope Trump in, and Trump, of course, he knows that that's exactly what they do, because there's nothing new here. They're suddenly issuing this ultimatum. This is the same thing that they came up with 2 months ago, and Russia had already said no. So they're suddenly making this whole fetish of this. Oh, this is our ultimatum, the 30-day ceasefire without conditions, when the Russians have already said no. And then they said this was a few days after J.D. Vance said that, we've ended our obsession with this 30-day ceasefire. Well, no, I mean, apparently they're even more obsessed. And then they think that just because we keep saying Donald Trump, in every sentence, he's going to sign off on this sanctions package.
I'll tell you, these Europeans have a daddy issue with Trump. They got a real daddy issue with him. Okay, this is good. They're going to fall flat on their face. Again, we've talked quite a bit about narratives. What they're trying to sell us right now is that this is a fresh look, fresh approach.
Right.
There's nothing fresh about it.
Not at all.
This is just churning it around and around and around. And there is news. There is new news. Trump said, let's start negotiations in Istanbul on May 15th. I mean, those are facts. A time, a place. Who's invited?
Right.
What are the Europeans proposing? Exactly. Another round of sanctions.
Exactly. Yeah.
What you have an ultimatum. So if your ultimatum isn't met, then what are you going to do? Do you see the different approaches here?
No, exactly. I mean, it's really I mean, it is obviously pathetic on a part of the Europeans, but it's pathetic on basically a really disgusting objectives, which is we have to keep this war going. That's all that they want to do. We have to keep this war going. It's really, normally one has, the peace plan, the peace initiative, in which, however, ineffectually, you're trying to facilitate peace talks or, some negotiated outcome. Here, they're trying to figure out, well, how can we keep this war going for a little longer? Well, let's see if we can maybe pull a few strings, pull the wool over Trump's eyes, and then so he won't actually see what we're up to. And particularly when Trump and J.D. Vance in particular have already made clear that we actually do see what you're up to, and that you're trying to manipulate this whole thing with the 30-day ceasefire. You're trying to manipulate us into continuing with this war.
But they're not doing it with much finesse. Okay, I already mentioned, this ultimatum. Again, this is going back to Chamberlain's famous speech, demanding that Germany withdraw from Poland after the invasion in September of 1939. That's where that one comes from. Unconditional. This is emulating. It was actually FDR's idea for unconditional surrender of Germany. Churchill was aghast.
Right.
Because FDR didn't tell Churchill he was going to make this. There would be the unconditional surrender of Germany. Okay. And Churchill with his machinations, he maybe had 5 or 6 different scenarios playing at the same time. That's the way he was. Okay. So unconditional, that this is Ulysses S. Grant, Ulysses unconditional surrender grant. Remember these things? This is part of the theater. This is the performance. This is the kabuki element of it.
Right.
They're emulating what are truly historic figures and ideas, but they don't. This isn't the right cast. It isn't the right script. Okay.
No, that's right. That's great.
And everybody, no one in Europe technically is at war with Russia.
Yeah. We are not a party to the conflict. I don't know. Going through these tweets and going through these statements, it sounds to me like you are a party to the conflict. I mean, when you're making these demands unconditional, it sounds to me like you are a party to the conflict. You are making in the demand an unconditional this, that, and part of Russia. But you're not in any position to do so because you're not doing well on the battlefield. I mean, you have to be at least in a strong position to start making these kinds of demand unconditional. Well, hey, where do you get off demanding anything to be unconditional? And particularly as we know that what the conditions that you're going to be looking for. Hey, how can we sneak in as much military hardware as we can during these 30 days?
Exactly. Meanwhile, and this is part of the media perception war. I'm absolutely convinced, unless something happens in between time, Erdogan will do exactly what he's been asked to do, to host talks.
Right.
And let's listen to, geez, George, we got a lot of material ahead of us this week, a lot of material. Okay. What garbage are they going to come up with explaining why they won't show up to negotiate an end to the conflict? I want to be impressed. I won't be, I know, because we know this cast of characters. But what are they going to come up with?
Right. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Because what's the justification to say no to direct negotiations without conditions? Direct negotiations. What's the reason for saying no? Well, because we don't have an unconditional ceasefire. That's not yep.
Yeah, but I mean, the Russians will say, well, that's how we did it in 2022.
Right, exactly. That's exactly. We sat down and we negotiated. There was no ceasefire in place then. Yeah. And plenty of conflicts that have been brought to an end through negotiation where there wasn't a ceasefire. It's never been the case that the condition for negotiations is that there be a ceasefire. It's never been the case there, and there's no reason for it. Why are they doing it? Because they have no interest in a ceasefire. They have no interest in any kind of peaceful settlement. They think they can get a PR victory. That's one thing, but essentially, they do want to use this 30 days to shovel every piece of hardware they can into Ukraine.
It's even more pathetic than that. You know what it is, George? They just want to get through the next news cycle. That's all. That's all. Because that's how they think.
Right.
That's how they think. For me, what is so deplorable about all this is they don't give a hoot about Ukraine.
No.
They don't give a hoot about it.
No. That's exactly right. I mean, this has been 3 years, and you would think that your priority would be, hey, maybe this should be brought to an end. But that's not been 3 years. They wanted to keep this going. Conflict anywhere else, even India and Pakistan. Oh, it needs to stop right now. Sudan, yeah, I got to stop. No, 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 we don't want any. No, no, we've got to bring that to an end immediately. Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, yeah, got to bring it to an end right away. This is the one war they have no interest in bringing to an end. So yeah, absolutely, they couldn't care less. Couldn't care less about
Well,
Ukraine.
it's also, and this will be for those thinking about this in the future, what kind of culpability, moral culpability, is going to that people like Zelensky are going to have to
Very,
face?
very serious moral
You
culpability
know, his legacy is going to be one of disgust and anger by Ukrainians.
by Ukrainians. No, that's right. But that's right. Like I say, and of course, historians will remember Boris Johnson. This will be what people will remember Boris Johnson. People will remember, of course, his COVID nonsense, the parties, the cocktail parties he had while everyone else had a lockdown. So they'll remember that. But a much more serious legacy of Boris Johnson will be that he prevented a settlement, a very good settlement for Ukraine, and who knows how many people died as a result.
Well, and also in subsequent interviews, this guy is just not very bright. He even called it a proxy war.
You're right.
Which, of course, was verboten in the beginning. Oh no, you're Russian talking points. And then you had military personnel talking to CNN using the P word, proxy, Boris Johnson, and others. Okay, they just let the cat out of the bag. Okay,
Right.
then that long article that George and what was it? It was like longer than the Bible. That New York Times article. Okay, yeah,
Yes, yes. Uh,
which I'm absolutely convinced that there are people now they have in mind about writing the first version of this conflict, and they want to get ahead of the shark. Okay.
right, right, right. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's right. It's it's very. I mean, I think that's why it's important when we do these podcasts that we're kind of creating history here. So this will be there. There's a record there that historians will consult, and they will see these. These are the fraudulent negotiations that were instituted by the coalition of the what to call willing or the coalition of the irrelevant. This is how they tricked. They played these little tricks in order. Oh, can we keep this war going just for a little bit longer? Maybe we can see Trump off, and then things will be back to the good old days. It's a very very kind of it's rather sordid exercise, but thoroughly in keeping with everything NATO has done during this time.
Meanwhile, media reports here, take it at face value if you want. Two major offensives are being planned by the Russian military in Ukraine as part of the special military operation. So they're facts. Those are facts on the ground. I have no reason to disbelieve them. But the Europeans are just, they're riding their unicorns through their imaginary universe. Okay, thinking that they could. And this is all pitched to Donald Trump. Donald Trump,
All of it.
you
Yeah.
dropped the ball quite a few times on this one. Don't drop it this time. Okay, just don't.
Exactly.
All
Exactly.
right, everybody. That's our wrap for Sunday. That was a good 2 hour slog. This is the Goggle with Peter and George. I know, buddy. I'm going to tell everybody. Just give me a second, okay? This is the Goggle with Peter and George. We're on Locals. So please go to thegaggle.locals.com. Tomorrow we're doing a live stream. George goes solo on Tuesday, and Buddy has a public service announcement
Public service
going on with the tip jar.
The tip jar. He says, "Look, there's the coalition of the willing." He says, "The coalition of the willing. It's more like the coalition of the unwilling," and he's had it. He said, I'm not going to be captain of the coalition of the unwilling." Yeah, whew, boy, they are not looking happy, and not surprisingly. So there's only one remedy here. Look, this is really bad. One remedy, whatever you have.
This is a palace revolt.
That's right, the palace revolt. So whatever you have,
it's a coup d'état.
Exactly. Any money you have, you got to buy off the rebels. That's the only way you can prevent this uprising.
They don't want arms. They don't want arms. They just want cash.
Yeah, what exactly? They like that. They cash is that's exactly that's the way they think. So if you have anything, into the tip jar, all of it. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve on the technology, and above all, we're going to still this very ugly revolt. I mean, it could be very, very messy. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.